Well, we got more wet weather in the central part of the U.S. to start the week. Hurricane season, of course, is a big topic. Watching South America's weather also. Notice some frost and freezes here over the weekend in parts of Brazil and Argentina. So we got a lot to unpack once again this week. Joining us for a conversation, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions as we take a look at weather. Eric, thanks for being with us here this week. And before we jump into things for what we're seeing currently, I want to start. We got a listener question in for you from Andrew in Northwest Georgia here this week. And he was talking about the Gleissberg cycle and wondering why it's not being largely talked about. Can you give us just a brief overview of what the Gleissberg cycle is? And is it something that you use or other folks use with their weather modeling at all?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andrew, and I really appreciate you tossing it up here because I get asked about it a lot. So the Gleissberg cycle refers to kind of an overarching longer-term pattern in the number of sunspots. So if you ever heard of sunspots, you know there's actually a pretty regular cadence in them. They reach a peak about every 11 years. There's even a waveform that goes over the top of that that's about 22 years long. And then there's this big one, this big cycle to it, and that's what we call the Gleissberg cycle. Now, by some estimates, maybe it's 88, 89 years in length between peaks and valleys, and then some other estimates, it's about 100 years. But the big question is, can we use it to predict something? In other words, does it add predictability? Can we say something about it and tell about increased risk, either on the up or the downside? That's the question. Because most often you'll hear someone talk about it with respect to major drought risk. They'll point about droughts in the late 1840s. They'll talk about drought in the 1930s. They'll talk about the drought now in the 2020s, the mid 2020s, especially 2025. So here it is in kind of a nutshell. I personally don't use it as a forecasting metric to look out that far. And one of the reasons is if you just historically correlate sunspot cycle activity to precipitation patterns or temperature patterns, the correlations are too weak to use. They're around zero. The other part of this is really kind of two parts. We can't use that particular metric to understand drought episodes that weren't in the cyclical behavior. So like 1988 or 2012, or for your part of the world, some of the drought that we had like in 2016 or 2007. And as a result, I don't often find it to be a really useful metric to try to predict these things. And then I guess here's my last point about this. If we had discovered that this cycle was so closely tied to drought episodes anywhere across the United States, we would probably already be seeing a reaction to the fact that maybe next year was the peak in it. So what I mean here is that if it was so well established in the scientific community that this was something that is regular and predictable, we would already be seeing a run up in big commodities on the prediction of that big drop next year. But the reality of it is that, and you know, I know everybody listening knows this. I mean, think about last spring, right? We had a drought in spring. I mean, it was 60 days long in the Midwest. But then it rained in July and the crop was fine. South America, very little rain to start their growing season, but it rained in July, their equivalent of July, which is January, and the crop comes out. So that's what makes this so difficult to use as a predictor. And it's just not something I typically put in my forecasting kind of repertoire or really let it rent a lot of space in my brain. But I love the question because you will hear a lot about it over the next, let's call it 18 months. I promise you that we will hear a lot about the Gleissberg cycle.
Yeah, it's an interesting question to ponder. So thanks for heading down that rabbit hole with us a little bit here, Eric. Let's talk about what we're seeing here this week in the central part of the U.S. I guess let's start there. Wet once again. I know we've seen, I'm just looking at the radar early in the week, plenty of showers and storms across the southern central plains up into parts of the Corn Belt. So what's the setup here for this week ahead, Eric?
Yeah, the setup is the artificial intelligence nailed it. Okay, so I was watching it all last week and I love comparing models. It's just fun for me. And the AI was the most aggressive on some of this rain, and it turns out it did pretty well. So yeah, it's raining in parts of Missouri. In fact, I'm heading out to St. Louis here in a few hours. I'm going to bring the umbrella for the whole week. We've got rain that came through Iowa. We had rain that hit parts of Kansas, and even rain that hit the panhandles, which were desperately needing it. Now, I say those areas, and I need to make sure that you know that there are spots that need the rain that didn't get it. There are sections of the central and western Corn Belt that need more moisture, and then the Ohio River Valley has been quite dry as of late as well, despite some rain showers that have gotten in and around Indiana, Ohio, especially some severe weather last week, and then into Kentucky, Tennessee. So we need to see this weather forecast verify. And by the way, during much of this week, we're not going to be getting the heat back. It's all down in Texas. It's across the South. It's not even in California anymore. It's just tucked into Texas, where the evaporation rates this week may top 3 inches if there's moisture there to evaporate. So we're cool, and we have better chances for rain. And it's mid-August, Jesse. This is going to push this crop, right? This is not a signal for a big change in the direction of prices based upon weather alone. So yeah, that's the rundown for at least the next 7 days. Week 2 does look a little bit warmer and drier for the Corn Belt, by the way, but I don't think anybody would complain about that.
No, I think a little heat after some cool weather and a little bit of precipitation is just going to help that crop pop even more, I think, in certain areas. So I would agree with you there. And of course, I think all of this pattern, we've been talking about La Nina and things like that, and we just haven't really seen that shift over to La Nina, have we, Eric?
No, and not just here, but also across the Southern Hemisphere. And we've just not had we see a little bit of cooler water, but it's not behaving according to La Nina. So what's dominating it? It's really warm off of the coast of Japan, across way out into the Central Pacific. Then there's another huge area of heat in the North Central Pacific. Then the North Atlantic is very, very hot. I think that is what is really, truly driving this pattern now. And La Nina is waiting, and it's trying to get going. But our Southern Oscillation Index, that's like an index we use. I don't know, it's like a stock market index, right? It's got to be positive for us to say the atmosphere is behaving La Nina-like, and it is right now at -10. It would need to be above a 7. So we're just not there. And I think the biggest thing that we're watching is other factors. It's not La Nina. And I'll tell you, the big one that I'm watching is the one that's moving through the Indian Ocean right now. There's a transition of the MJO that's going to be moving from the Indian Ocean to north of Australia. And historically, when that occurs, it tends to take the lid off of the Atlantic in terms of tropical systems. And we will likely be seeing, especially after about, I don't know, August 23rd, 24th, 25th, it seems that the Atlantic is going to go back to producing big storm systems that could now get closer to the east coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The current one out there right now called potential tropical cyclone number 5, which is the one that it's called as you and I are recording this. It's going to be a fish storm. It'll likely get named, but I think it's going to stay out in the open Atlantic, not posing a threat to the United States.
Yeah, and thinking about hurricane season here, obviously we had Debbie dumped so much rain in parts of the eastern seaboard here last week, and just thinking about this, and we've talked about it, Eric, this uptick here and the potential for a pretty gnarly hurricane season here is really still in front of us, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there's 80 more days of this. That's where we are. We have the peak of the hurricane season is still more than a month away. And then we have the whole second half of it to go after that, which is, another 45 or 50 days possibly as you get into the month of October. So the reality is that the Atlantic Ocean is very warm, and most of the predictions, like the newest one that just came out from Colorado State University, some of the best in the business, they're looking at 23 named systems, averages around 14. So it's going to be a pretty active go. We at least know that the conditions are primed. And I would be very shocked if something came along and made this season not what we're anticipating. But that happens all the time. We get shocks, we miss it. So we'll have to keep an eye on that part of the Atlantic.
How about South America? I mentioned at the open, it looked like a little bit of frost and freeze activity in parts of Argentina, even a little bit of Brazil as well here the last couple of days. What are things looking like in South America, Eric?
But it's their late winter, so I don't think any surprises here. The forecast going forward is warm, but it's still quite dry. So the problem is that we don't have any early signals that the monsoon's going to start up and get cranking as we enter the month of September. I know that quite a few more growers have been given kind of the green light to plant in September, and you'll have growers that will plant a crop regardless of the law, because the law is about, I think, I have to go double check this, but I think it's about the emergence of the crop. You can get trouble if that crop is up. And so as a result, they may plant seed and let it sit till the monsoonal rains get there. But I don't see an early start to this monsoon this year. I think we're going to have a bit of a delay going forward. But overall, if La Nina does eventually come in late this fall, their spring, it probably means a wetter growing season for about 80% of Brazil's growing area, with only the drought areas being in southern Brazil and Argentina, if they do develop. And so that's not exactly the best news given where our markets currently sit. But We have to just take that news and try to watch those things and see how they play out over the coming weeks and months.
Couldn't agree more. Folks can find more weather details online, agweather.com, ag-wx.com, and also sign up for Eric's weekly weather newsletter there as well. With that, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Always good to talk with you, my friend. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.